Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Learning Happy Hour. Today, we have Suzy VanPatten, and Suzy's from Professional Services. We love having Suzy come and talk to us, and we're going to have a special conversation here around lessons learned from, your encounters with different customers. How would you frame it? What would you title this?
I would frame it, this would be common misunderstandings, mistakes, misconfigurations that we tend to see across all customers. And we think it's important. I think it's very important that you guys understand this information, that so you can go back and not have to learn the same mistakes these other customers learned.
So we talk a lot about vulnerabilities, but one of the vulnerabilities in particular we need to talk about is user misconfiguration or user misunderstanding, because that's a vulnerability too, right? So this might be like notes from the field.
Notes from the field. Really great name for it.
Good.
This is notes from the field. And understand that the information we're going to be giving you is not things that we see at one or two customers. It's things we see at many customers that they tend to consistently get wrong. Remember, this firewall of ours, there has never been one like it. Never. So it takes a while. It took me a while, and I've been doing firewalls a long time to figure out how to properly configure this particular type of firewall. This is an attempt to help you guys figure out what we're seeing, what you might be getting wrong as well, and start getting everyone towards a much more secure network.
And that's the goal, right? That's the goal, is to help customers.
Absolutely.
Good.
So my role, as you know, I'm the global practice lead for threat for professional services. So in that role, I get to address a very specific area of the firewall, which is everything traffic and threat. And you'd think, gee, isn't that all basically the whole product? Well, not really. We have a lot of migrations, we deal with routing, we deal with cloud, we deal with implementing all these things, parts of our platform around the customer's environment. And I get to deal with traffic and threats, and that goes hand in hand with rules and security profiles.
So you talk a lot to customers every day.
Every day.
You talk about, customers who've adopted best practices, and you've seen the good, but you've also seen the bad. You've seen where customers have made mistakes, and you've seen the misconfigurations, and you've consulted a lot with a lot of those customers.
Yes.
So you've got that, you've taken a lot of notes in terms of the good and the bad, and lessons learned from those.
Yes, I've taken a lot, and I sometimes when I see the misconfigurations, the misunderstandings at one customer, and then I visit a customer the next week, and I think, am I looking at the same network? Because these misunderstandings seem to travel. Not quite sure how. And so, of course, I take all that feedback and I feed it back to you guys in education. I feed it back to the product managers. I feed it back to everyone. I like to take what I'm seeing in the field and feed it back to the entire company, so we can come out with things like Iron Skillet and give you the customers more and more guidance to lead them on their journey.
And we're feeding them back now to customers who are watching this, right? So all of us can learn, right?
Yeah, and I've talked about this before. Some of you might have seen the Ignite talk and everything. And it was interesting. I talked to a customer one time after talking about things I keep seeing the customers doing wrong. And I said to him, I kind of feel bad sometimes because I'm basically telling you guys what you're doing wrong. He said, nope, keep telling us. We'll keep going back and fixing it. So that was really good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what's your first lesson learned, or what's one of the first things you talk about when you address customers and you want to encourage them to not make the same mistakes that others have made?
If I had to talk about the first thing we talk about is visibility. I work with many customers who don't have enough visibility for me to even look at what's going on with their network. Visibility is huge.
You mean they can't just turn it on and it just shows them everything?
They can. They don't. They tend to, I think one of a really good example is we visit customers who have visibility turned on. And when I say visibility, I mean logging of everything, logging of traffic, logging of threats, logging of system logs, logging of everything. They turn on whatever features they're using when they first buy the firewall, and then they forget to ever go back.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a problem from the standpoint of they're looking at their logs and they're not seeing anything, so they think they're perfectly secure. So if you don't actually enable alerts in some of those other areas, then they don't even know, right?
Right.
You don't know what you don't know. So that visibility is key. It's the first step in being secure, is getting as much visibility as possible.
Yes.
And, you know, one of the things customers may not, remember to do is turn on logging on a rule by rule basis. I mean, how often do you see customers have even security rules where they don't turn logging on? Or
how often do I see them where they're not turning logging on? A lot. I see that a lot. And I think a part of it is you have a lot of hands in the firewall. And if you forget to put a logging profile on a rule, or if you forget to put a security profile group on a rule, that's not a good thing. Of course, we have a really great fix for that. All you need is a logging profile with the name lowercase default, and it will automatically populate every brand new rule. The same with security profile groups. If you have a security profile group with the name lowercase default, automatically populate every brand new rule. Now you may end up with security profile groups, you have multiples. So I always say pick your most common one. I always say the outbound one, the one to the internet, and duplicate it and call it default. And then you can still put the proper security profile groups on your rules, but if you miss one, you still have some level of protection and you still have visibility. And visibility is what we're talking about here. The biggest thing, you asked me, what is the biggest thing? That is absolutely it. And not just in the case of logging, also in the case of things like customers will download new apps and they'll have a little checkbox that says, basically tells them not to automatically update load the new apps in. So what happens? Well, I visited a customer recently who had been a customer probably 3 or 4 years, and they were ready to do an engagement that we at Palo, at Professional Services do called an app ID migration, where we basically look through their logs and intelligently determine which applications need to be cooked into the rules, basically. Well, the problem was when we looked at their disabled apps, they had 600.
Oh my goodness.
So obviously all the traffic that was flowing through that firewall was being identified as applications that were loaded when they first installed the firewall. So there's a very specific checkbox that you need to handle with care. So it's when you do your content updates, there's a checkbox that says disable new applications after installation. And that is meant so that as we release our new apps and you have a very app ID rule set, once you get to that point where most of your rules use app IDs, you need to be very careful about the new apps. But most customers we see have migrated over and start out as port-based. At that point, you need to let those apps just install. There's a point when you need to uncheck that box, and that's the point when you actually have a process in place to review those new apps and decide where you need to change those. So
what I hear you saying is, if they disable new applications after installation, they turn that on, and there are reasons why people do that. One reason is because when new application signatures come down, if they don't operationalize that, if they don't review it, then they run the risk of that traffic being blocked because there's no rule for that new application because it's been kind of addressed in other applications, parent applications,
Right.
web browsing, SSL, or something like that.
Right.
So now, once we release a new application signature, the whole point is to give our customers more control over that traffic.
Yes.
And to be able to do, additional threat prevention on that traffic. So we want them to be able to use those new signatures, but they have to operationalize that. If they disable this, what I hear you're saying is they will have less visibility into their traffic. And as time goes on, that problem just exponentially gets greater because there's more apps that they're not actually taking advantage of. And so the firewall is just treating everything like vanilla. It's like creating a bunch more flavors, but you're still putting the same label on it all. It's all still vanilla.
And we do understand that when customers first put a firewall in place, they tend to start, if they're migrating over from an old firewall, another vendor, they tend to start port-based, and that's understandable.
So let me follow that up with, what are some ways that customers have operationalized adopting new application signatures? What's the best approach you've seen? I mean, you see a lot of not operationalizing this.
Right. Well, we have stopped releasing apps every week at this point to make things easier for the customers. We no longer release apps weekly. We only release them once a month. So there needs to be a very clear process, meeting, discussion that allows you to look at your apps and the new applications and decide which ones you need to add to certain rules. More visibility. Here's a big one that we run into a lot. We do something we call a threat assessment with some of our customers. We load some reports. We look for indicators of compromise, look to see if they appear to be compromised. One thing that causes us a lot of problems is visibility behind proxy servers. We have numerous customers. I would say probably 50-60% of the customers that we work with have proxy servers that make it difficult for us to see what the real IP is of somebody who's visiting malware sites, who's visiting command and control sites. We have a great feature, XForwardedFor, which can be turned on both the proxy and the firewall, that allows us to see that real IP behind the proxy.
Oh, that's a great tip.
Many customers don't know about it. It's interesting when I go out, a lot of customers don't know about that feature. So it's really great. If you look at this report that we're looking for here, this customer, as you can see, he's only got 4 IPs. That was my clue that these must be proxies. It's amazing, the signature. I notice it. It's a heuristic thing, kind of, almost, right? So I said, hey, customer, are those proxies? Because only 4 IPs on your entire network are going to malware, command and control, etc. And he said, yeah, it is. And I said, well, we have this great feature, XForwardedFor. And a common question I get when we talk about XForwardedFor is, okay, so I enable it on my proxy, I enable it on my firewall, but now I'm going to allow the real IP to go out to the world. And that is not true, because we actually strip that off. As it hits our firewall, we grab it for its value, and then we strip it right out of the header.
Myth
let it go
busted.
Myth busted. Exactly.
Right there. Myth
right there.
busted. This is Suzy's Myth Busters right here.
So it's an extremely easy setting if you look on our firewall. Just 2 check boxes. And as a matter of fact, we have a new template or threat framework that we provided for you guys called Iron Skillet. For those who haven't seen it, it's a day 1 recommended configuration for anybody to use. It's available on the support site when you register your Panorama or your firewall. It's also available on GitHub, and I'm sure they'll be happy to share the links to that with you. But we've taken things like this XForwardedFor and the checking of these 2 boxes, and we've built all that in, baked it right into Iron Skillet, so you don't have to worry. Now your question is, well, what if I don't have a proxy? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It'll just ignore this. If you don't have a proxy, there's not going to be an HTTP, there's not going to be that IP stuck into the HTTP header. It's not going to cause a problem. So we've taken all of these recommendations I'm giving you, and we've built it into Iron Skillet.
It's great. Iron Skillet. What do they call
Iron
it?
Skillet.
What do they call Iron Skillet?
We were sitting around, and Iron Skillet was built by a team of people from various, and of course I was there fighting hard for you guys to make sure we don't kill anybody's network. And somebody said every good project needs a name. And Iron Skillet is really hard to get through, like a firewall should be, right? Hard to get through. That's an Iron Skillet.
A hardened pan.
A hardened pan, as in Palo Alto Networks.
That's exactly right.
Very good. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, somebody mentioned that somewhere at some point that I heard. So XForwardedFor is useful with firewalls, but you got devices behind the proxy server, and you got trying to talk through the firewall, the gateway. What are some other challenges in terms of visibility that you've encountered?
System logs, probably some of the more underrated logs on our firewall and Panorama.
I would agree with that.
I often see customers where I walk in and I review the system logs as part of a threat assessment, and I say, wow, it looks to me like your user ID agents have stopped responding, 3 or 4 of them, or your NTP server's broken or whatever. And they say, well, how did you know? I said, I looked at your system logs. Now, we consider critical system logs to be important enough to email to yourself real time. If it's a critical, it means you need to drop everything and say, what just happened? Did my firewall fail over? Something broke. So we recommend those are emailed real time, and that's built into Iron Skillet as well. The rest, the highs and mediums are the next. Those are the 2 that I find are underrated. Those are the 2 that tell you my DNS server's unreachable. I can't do this. I can't do that. There are a lot in there in the high and mediums that are not so important. So you cannot email them to yourself. There's too many. There's just too many. You can't write a report against them on the firewall, but you can certainly take it offline to your syslog server and grep out, parse out the irrelevant and give yourself the most, or simply once a week, just review your system logs. It really doesn't take that much time, especially if you've consolidated them. So here's an example of one from a customer. We're seeing these. So basically, it's telling you that the EDL can't be used because it's a text file. This is just one example.
Right.
I see many, many examples. And sometimes when I arrive, I've seen situations where they might have 6 user ID agents and only 1 is working now, and they weren't aware of it until I showed up. So don't forget that level of visibility. That's a huge visibility deal there. The other thing we see a lot of double logging. We see customers, one customer I remember said, some things I see twice, some things I don't see at all. I just feel like I'm totally unsure whether I'm logging correctly. And so we walked through and basically made him into that perfect, what we consider perfect logging structure for his firewall and his Panorama, so he gets everything that he needs. Often people forget that Panorama has its own system logs.
Right.
Yeah.
There's system logs of the firewall,
Yeah.
system logs in Panorama.
Yep.
And both of those need to be monitored.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there you have it, our first tip, and that is to log everything, get as much visibility as possible. Consider XForwardedFor if you've got proxies, and don't forget about the system logs.
Yes.
Now, one final thing, you mentioned Iron Skillet a couple of times, so there's probably some people watching this who may never have heard of Iron Skillet. And so where would they go to learn more about Iron Skillet?
So there's several references on our live website, live.paloaltonetworks.com. They can look up Iron Skillet. You can also go to GitHub. It is a free place for you to get.
I love free.
Yeah, Iron Skillet. Remember, it's a framework. It's a starting place. It's not where we want you to end. It's where we think you can safely start. There's a process to get all the way to fully secure, but it's a great starting place with a great framework to make your configurations easier. So go to GitHub, look up Iron Skillet. One other place you can get it now is when you go out to register a firewall or a Panorama, it will ask if you want to download the day one configuration and load it on your firewall or Panorama, and that's Iron Skillet as well.
All right, day one configuration, and then that process that you described in terms of maturing your configuration, what's the best tool they can use for that?
The best tool to measure the progress of their configuration is the BPA. The BPA
I love
tool
the BPA.
on customersuccess.paloaltonetworks.com. It's great. Highly recommended. We use it in professional services all the time. It's fantastic.
Good.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzy. Appreciate that.
Sure thing.
Thank you for watching this episode of Learning Happy Hour. At Palo Alto Networks, we are strong advocates of continuous learning, and we hope you are too. To continue learning about our fantastic products and services, you can attend a class with one of our authorized training centers, or you can self-study about these products and services through our digital e-learning courses. And if you like this episode of Learning Happy Hour, consider watching this one or this one, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. And thanks again for watching.